All right, today we're going to dig into something that you might think is pretty straightforward. But trust me, there's a whole hidden world to explore. We're talking about respiration in plants. So we all learn this in school, right? Plants are these amazing oxygen factories, and we need them to breathe. But is that the whole picture? Do plants also use oxygen? Do they breathe in a way that's anything like we do? Well, the answer is a little more complex and way more interesting than you might think. You know, it really all boils down to one simple thing: energy. Every single living organism, from a huge, magnificent tree down to the tiniest microbe, needs energy to, well, to live. Energy to grow, to move things around inside their cells, to make new life. The big question is, where does that energy actually come from, and how do they put it to work?
When it comes to energy, you can kind of think of plants as living a double life. On one side, you've got photosynthesis. That's the famous one. It's how plants make their food, using sunlight to pack energy away into sugar molecules. But here's the thing, making food and using food are two totally different jobs. For that second part, plants use cellular respiration. That's the process of breaking that sugar back down to release all that stored up energy so the plant can actually, live.
So what is cellular respiration, really? Deep down at the molecular level, it's all about taking these complex molecules, like glucose, and systematically snapping the chemical bonds between the carbon atoms. It's a controlled, slow burn, an oxidation process. And every time one of those bonds breaks, a little burst of energy is set free.
Now, the cell can't just use that raw energy as it pops off. It's too chaotic. It needs to be captured and packaged into a usable form. Think about it like this. You can't pay for your coffee with a bar of gold, right? You need cash. For the cell, that cash is a molecule called ATP. It's the universal energy currency. The energy from breaking down glucose gets loaded into these ATP molecules, ready to be spent anywhere in the cell.
Okay, so this brings us right back to our original question. If plants are doing cellular respiration, and a lot of that process needs oxygen, then how in the world do they breathe? They don't have lungs, they don't have a nose, so how do they get the gases they need?
Well, it turns out their system is just incredibly clever and efficient. It's completely decentralized. Instead of one big organ like lungs, each part of the plant, every leaf, every bit of stem, every root, pretty much handles its own gas exchange. Plus, their energy needs are way lower than an animal's, and most of their living cells are pretty close to the surface. They use these tiny little pores called stomata and a whole network of air spaces to let gases just drift in and out. No lungs necessary. It's genius, really.
So, let's follow the energy trail. This whole complex process of cellular respiration kicks off with one crucial first step. And what's so cool is that it's a step that's found in pretty much every form of life on this planet. It's the first crack at that glucose molecule, and it's called glycolysis.
The name itself is a dead giveaway, if you know a little Greek. Glykos means sugar, and lysis means splitting, so sugar splitting. That's exactly what it does. This first stage takes that one big 6-carbon glucose molecule and snaps it in half, creating two smaller 3-carbon molecules. And this all happens right out in the main fluid of the cell, the cytoplasm.
But it's not just a simple chop. You can think of it in two main phases. First, there's what's called the investment phase. You know the saying, you gotta spend money to make money? The cell actually uses a couple of those ATP energy molecules to get the glucose ready. Then comes the payoff phase, where the molecule splits and the cell makes back its investment and then some, ending with a small net gain of energy and two smaller fuel molecules called pyruvic acid.
The whole thing is this elegant chain of 10 different chemical reactions, like a tiny, perfect assembly line. Each step is guided by a specific enzyme, making sure it happens just right. It's this ancient, beautifully orchestrated pathway that takes one molecule of glucose and turns it into 2 molecules of pyruvate, ready for the next stage of the process.
Now that tiny profit of 2 ATP molecules from glycolysis, that's just pocket change. The real energy jackpot is still locked up inside those pyruvic acid molecules. And to get to it, we have to go on a journey. We have to leave the general cytoplasm and travel into the cell's true engine room, the mitochondrion.
And this is where oxygen finally gets its moment to shine. Those pyruvic acid molecules get escorted into the very heart of the mitochondrion. Their arrival kicks off what we call aerobic respiration. Aerobic meaning it requires oxygen. Once inside, these molecules are fed into a circular set of reactions called the Krebs cycle. Now, the main purpose here isn't to crank out a bunch of ATP directly.
Instead, its job is to finish dismantling what's left of the original sugar molecule, releasing CO2 in the process. And as it does that, it charges up a whole fleet of special energy-carrying molecules. So think of the Krebs cycle less like an ATM spitting out cash and more like a massive charging station for high-powered batteries.
And that brings us to the grand finale, the main event. All that energy, carefully harvested from the glucose molecule, is now packed into these molecular batteries. The next stage, the electron transport system, is where the cell is finally going to cash them all in for a truly massive ATP payout. So this all goes down on the squiggly inner membrane of the mitochondrion. Those charged up molecular batteries come and drop off their high-energy electrons. These electrons then get passed down a line of proteins, almost like a current of electricity. This energy flow is used to pump protons, building up this powerful energy gradient. And who's waiting at the very end of the line, ready to grab those used-up electrons? Oxygen. It's the final electron acceptor, clearing the way for the whole process to keep running. That's its absolutely crucial job. That powerful gradient that was built up is then used to power a tiny molecular turbine that just churns out ATP like crazy. So, after all that, what's the final tally? From one single molecule of glucose, from start to finish, the cell can generate, ideally, up to 38 molecules of ATP. That is a huge energy return.
But wait, the story isn't quite over, because it turns out this whole respiratory pathway isn't just a demolition line for sugar. It's actually more like a central, bustling, two-way highway for the cell's entire economy. Because this pathway does more than just break things down, scientists have a special name for it. They call it an amphibolic pathway. It's a bit of a mouthful, but all it really means is that it's involved in both catabolism, that's the breaking down part, and anabolism, which is the building up of new molecules.
It's really cool how this works. On the breakdown side, it's not just for sugar. Fats and proteins can also be broken down and fed into the pathway at different points to generate energy. But here's the two-way street part. If the plant needs to build new fats, it can literally pull the necessary building blocks out of the pathway. If it needs to make new proteins, it can grab precursor molecules from the Krebs cycle. It's the ultimate metabolic hub. So just take a second to think about that. The very same fundamental pathway that a plant uses to get energy is also the central workshop for building all the stuff it's made of. It's this beautiful, dynamic system of breaking down and building up, all flowing through the same core reactions. And then you realize that this exact same pathway, this same two-way street, is running inside your own cells right this second. It's in almost every living thing. And that really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does that shared ancient chemistry tell us about how deeply interconnected all life on this planet really is?